Can I start with you, Alistair, and do what I do at this sort of point at the beginning of a fresh round of conversation, ask you for your thought for the day?
Yeah, I think, it's more a thought for the last 3 weeks, really. The election was sort of seen as a repeat of the old guy against the even older guy 3 weeks ago. And then since the debate, since the shooting at Trump, since the selection yesterday of J.D. Vance, this election has really burst into life. It's really become, front and centre of everyone's thinking. And I think now probably will be until November the 5th.
Yeah, I mean, just on that sort of basic level, as all of us look at this story, I think all of us have done a certain amount of election reporting in our time. I've done probably more than most people, and I've seen nothing remotely resembling what I'm seeing here. Actually, I've seen nothing remotely resembling what I've left back behind in the UK. But this is a whole new kettle of fish, Siobhan. How extraordinary it all is.
It is an extraordinary moment, and if I could offer a thought for the day.
Please do.
I've been thinking about how to crystallize what we're witnessing here. And it occurs to me that over the past 10 to 15 years, this country has been seeing a slow motion realignment of the Republican Party. And the selection of J.D. Vance last night as Trump's running mate puts that transformation on steroids.
Yeah.
And you are about to see a sea change in the political life of this country.
Okay, you can't say that and say no more. I want to hear more of that from you, Siobhan, and also from you, Alistair. We're talking about, and I think you get a little bit of a sense of it just watching what's going on, don't you? You see the Republican Party in almost a new incarnation since the weekend. I mean, since the events in Pennsylvania when Donald Trump had that brush with death, and you see people all around us now talking about the Republican nominee being saved by the hand of God from being killed at the weekend, and talk of maybe a new Donald Trump emerging from all of that. But you're talking about something in the nature of the party as well here. Just tell me more. What are you thinking?
Well, this party went from being a party of free markets, a party that really placed emphasis on the U.S. having a strong role in the world, and you are turning to a party that is increasingly looking more inward, that is less free market, more tariff-oriented, and of course at this particular moment, and this is where J.D. Vance comes in most profoundly, a country that could be on the verge of being much less committed to supporting Ukraine.
Yes. Yeah, well, that is a subject of deep and passionate interest on the other side of the Atlantic, as you can imagine, in London to the new government there, and in capitals all across Europe, and in the leadership of NATO, 30-plus countries we're talking about here. Many of them, not all, some, like Viktor Orban of Hungary, so much closer to Donald Trump, takes a different perspective on this. But many of the others are expressing and feeling the concern that your point points towards. Isolationism. If we get a Trump-Vance White House, Alistair, isolationism, US isolationism of a kind that we haven't seen for many years, it could suddenly be back in fashion.
I think so. I mean, you speak to Republicans, rank and file Republicans on the floor of the convention, and it seems to be what they want as well. There doesn't seem to be any pushback against this idea. There doesn't seem to be an idea that they want to return to the era of, say, Reagan, who was sort of strode across the world and wanted to spread the American system. People here seem to be very content that America will take a step back, not involve itself in foreign wars, be protectionist when it comes to its industry and its economy. And I just get the sense that yes, Trump and Vance sort of offer this sort of thing from a convention platform, but it's also what the rank and file of the party want as well.
Siobhan, what about the idea of American leadership? I mean, we speak, back home in London, of America as the leader of the free world. We talk about it as the central pillar of the Western Strategic Alliance. One might imagine, in our naivety, that would be a matter of great pride in the United States to be the leading light of the free and democratic world. And you're talking about an appetite here to pull back from all of that. Is there not something paradoxical about that?
I mean, I think back to Barack Obama, who wanted to avoid this sense of a chauvinistic America, but still called this country the indispensable nation. And now what you are hearing is a politics of scarcity, really, of there simply aren't the resources. And that is why we have to pull back to focus on meeting our own needs. That's the thinking.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about that as well is where it leaves the likes of us, John, the Brits and the Europeans, because you mentioned Ukraine's a very good example, but if Donald Trump and JD Vance come into power come November, Europe, NATO, other Western alliances will be, I think, reaching in the dark to find out, to find where that leadership is. Yeah. You've seen European countries increase defence spending, for example, over the last sort of 3 or 4 years under great pressure, not just from Donald Trump, but also I think from the Democratic administration as well. There's been this real pressure to sort of increase defence spending, this realisation that Europe has to sort out its own problems in its own backyard as well. I think that were Trump and Vance go into power in November, and maybe Vance then for years after that, I think you'll see a lot of sort of, as I say, reaching in the dark in Europe for, how do we, where is our leadership? How do we organise these things around the world now if America's taking a step back?
I sort of have a thought hanging on that, which is back during the first Trump administration, a lot of Republicans spoke in terms of guardrails. Who are the people you're going to set up around Donald Trump to stop him from acting on his worst impulses?
Yes.
And one of those guardrails, the thought had always been, could be the U.S. Senate, a Republican-led U.S. Senate. And what you were watching now and what you watched on the floor last night was the top Republican Senator, Mitch McConnell, get booed by everybody. And I watched Mitch McConnell as he walked off the stage, a very unhappy McConnell who had watched his least favorite senator J.D. Vance, get elected to be, or named to be, the vice presidential candidate. And it just occurred to me, it looks like the guardrails are going to.
Yeah, that is such an important point. If there's a change of administration in November, which then comes into office next January, a lot of the things we're talking about now, the future of policy towards Ukraine, the future of policy towards the NATO alliance, a lot of that's going to hinge on the wheels within wheels in Washington, D.C., the relationship between the White House and Capitol Hill. Tell us more about that. I mean, we don't watch that maybe closely enough. Donald Trump, we hear his ambitions. J.D. Vance is backing up those, let's call them isolationist thoughts very, very strongly. But Capitol Hill will be there too. And we're told quite often, Siobhan, that on Capitol Hill, the Republicans in the Senate and the House of Representatives still have a strong body of opinion, which is closer to the Reaganite way of leadership and engagement than is let's call them the New Order. How important is that?
It's very important, but I want to add a yes but here, because you're right. The Republicans, especially in the Senate, are much more oriented towards the Reagan way of thinking. But those Republicans are on the decline. And with this election, especially if it is a landslide, you could see a new crop of Republicans who are much more aligned with the J.D. Vances of the world.
Right, a new wave and a new image.
Well, you look at, Mitt Romney stepping down at the end of this term, and there is one sort of centrist Republican, moderate Republican. There doesn't seem to be a place now for the Bushes, for the Romneys, for the John McCain type figures in the Republican Party. Sort of giants of yesteryear are, I think, politically homeless now.
Is that a mark of the sort of people we see here? The sort of the MAGA Republicans at grassroots level simply squeezing out that old generation, that old way of thinking, and you're part of the new faith, or there's no place for you. It's their way or the highway.
You just saw Donald Trump arrive at the convention last night. I mean, as we discussed earlier, John, it was a sort of almost a quasi-religious event. This great power coming into the hall and everyone sort of paying homage. That never happened for Bush. It never happened for Romney. It never happened for McCain. It's moved into a different dimension. I think the room for anyone who is not a sort of foursquare MAGA Republican now it's very difficult. Glenn Youngkin in Virginia is a sort of more moderate figure. If Larry Hogan wins in Maryland, that will be a moderating voice. But they're fewer and further between than I think we've seen before.